Welcome to Beyond the Limits with me, Mike Forsyth.
And me, Matt Clark. Now, Mike, we are very grateful to be joined by Amy Perrin, OBE, founder of the Marmalade Trust, to talk about loneliness this week. Amy was awarded an OBE in 2024 for her work addressing loneliness globally. Now, on today's episode, she gives us a three-stage approach for dealing with loneliness. She explains why loneliness rates are so high, and we explore together the shocking health effects that loneliness can cause both psychologically and physically.
Now, Matt, I just didn't think there would be anyone who would be able to do this important topic justice. But honestly, I love this episode. As you'll hear, Amy comes across as such a kind, passionate and thoughtful guest, and it's one of my favourite interviews we've done. We're Beyond the Limits, and this is Amy Perrin. Amy, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast. What got you interested in loneliness?
So I'm a healthcare professional by background. I worked for the NHS for 15 years as an occupational therapist in the community rehab team. Started to get a bit interested in what was the commonality I was seeing with a lot of my patients, particularly those with long-term chronic conditions, being at home, regular district nurse visits, feeling like actually there was a loneliness element, which I obviously now know a lot more about. But specifically for me, I had a relationship breakdown. I'd lived in a new city, found myself as kind of a bit lost, and so fell back to what I normally do, which is volunteering. That always sort of gets me out of a bit of a funk. So yeah, set up a small tea party group, and then from that there were a couple of older people that didn't have anywhere to go for Christmas, so I decided to take them out, and then I became known as the woman in the clinic who was putting on something for Christmas Day, and people were phoning me up from local banks and all sorts saying, can this person that visits pop in and join for the day because they've been on their own, since their wife died or whatever. And yeah, so started from that. Didn't really think much more of it until I came back from my own Christmas and just realised the huge impact that it had had on people. It'd been really quite transformative. People had regularly been told by their GPs about various social connection opportunities, but hadn't taken it up, and actually they just couldn't bear another Christmas Day on their own. They'd felt sort of connected and cared for, and they were saying, what's out there? We don't use the internet. So yeah, Marmalade Trust started back then, 12 years ago now.
Wow. Yeah, I wanted to ask about that. So Marmalade Trust, do you mind just, I guess, giving a synopsis of how you founded that and what it is that the Marmalade Trust offers?
Yeah, so it was founded purely out of the need, really, and seeing the impact that could be happening. I guess that was linking in a little bit to the work that I was doing at the time as well. I was talking to a lot of my colleagues about loneliness and, what are we doing in our teams collectively to talk to people about it? And people were sort of saying, I'd never mention loneliness. No, I would be there even longer. I would worry people would cry. I wouldn't know how to handle it. And yeah, the sort of need and demand for effort kind of increased. So started it up really small, just kind of increased the Christmas Day events, not because we have a religious affiliation, just purely because of it being a really tough day for a lot of people. And then following that, over the years, we've increased to running various things. Back in 2017, I was leaving a patient's house, actually, who mentioned to me that it was National Flip-Flop Day. And I thought, how can people be talking about flip-flops and no one's talking about loneliness? So decided to set up Loneliness Awareness Week with a small group of volunteers, and that's now a global week, and we run it every year annually in June, and we reached about 250 million people this year across the world. So yeah, it's grown quite significantly.
Wow, that's amazing. Okay, I want to dig into that a little bit more in terms of how you're making an impact a bit later, because I think it would be good to start with, I guess, what loneliness is and how we define that, because you've quite nicely at the start of this conversation, you acknowledged that you were maybe experiencing some loneliness. You talked about relationship breakdown in your city, and then you said that you acknowledged it in your work and your practice as a therapist. And I guess I'm wondering that a lot of people don't actually acknowledge it or aren't aware of it. And how do we define loneliness, and when is it normal and when might it be considered abnormal?
The definition is that it is a subjective feeling, that there is a mismatch between the level of social connection that you have, so the quantity and the quality and that you need. So that's the kind of definition we talk, and I've always, I guess very much from the beginning, really spoken a lot about loneliness as being a natural human emotion. It feels really important to me that actually the solution to this doesn't lie with someone else. The solution to this lies with yourself, and we have to encourage people to take agency around that. And it's very multi-systemic. We need lots of different areas around in our life to help people feel less lonely and more connected. But essentially, hunger is a warning sign we need to eat. Thirst is a warning sign we need to drink. Loneliness is a warning sign that we need to address the level of social connections that we have. That's different for everybody, whether you're an introvert, extrovert. Pandemic was obviously hugely challenging for people, but an incredible time to observe the differences that people had. Some people who were very introverted found they're quite a delight. We had lots of people who contacted us and said, gosh, no clubs with the kids, and I'm just at home and I'm just being, and life's got to change afterwards. I'm not sure it potentially has for people, but yeah. And there were other people. I remember somebody who got in touch who said, my world has opened up. I'm a wheelchair user and I've just been round the British Museum and I feel included. I'm on Zoom calls. Single parents who were saying, I'm being joined in wine club evenings because everyone's at home. So suddenly we had this emergence of, actually we were all pretty much in a similar boat. A lot of us weren't. A lot of us were incredibly busy. But yeah, for a lot of people, it was an opportunity to actually think about social connection and what's missing. As well, I like to talk about loneliness. There's not one type. There's lots of different types of loneliness. So you have emotional loneliness, which is a lack of meaningful and intimate connections. So that might be the lack of a partner. And that's not necessarily something that you're going to be able to resolve. If you're in your 90s, you were happily married for 60 odd years and your partner died, there is going to be an element of emotional loneliness that will maintain probably to the rest of your life. Then there's a social component, a social loneliness. And that, again, during the pandemic was really interesting because this was a part that most people lost the most of. So you couldn't go and play football. People were not going and joining their clubs, going to gigs, doing all the normal areas. And it's quite often we see people that we talk to and support during loneliness. It's quite often an area that people don't identify when it's missing. A classic example of that is a contact we had a couple of years ago from somebody who was in their 30s, 40s, who'd been to see the GP, who'd thought that they were depressed and they didn't think they were. He was a new parent, and kind of reached out to us saying, I've just read your stuff on your website and I'm wondering if I'm lonely. And we had a few email exchanges with him and said, have things changed? What life changes had he had? So become a new parent. His wife was a high flyer at home. He felt really guilty. And the two big things that he dropped for that reason, because he felt he needed to support her, was going to the pub on a Friday and playing football on a Sunday. And so all of a sudden his social connections had really dropped.
It struck me listening to that, actually, Amy, about that individual you mentioned reaching out to you, that feels like a really brave move. It still feels to me as though there's a significant stigma around loneliness and admitting that you're feeling lonely. You mentioned at the start about the difficulty actually bringing that up with people, and I could totally see that. I've certainly found that myself in clinical practice, but also actually admitting yourself that you've been lonely is really hard. As an aside, I was reading a few articles just before we were recording this, debating whether loneliness is more of a societal or an individual failure. And I think that question is interesting, but I think the use of the word failure struck me quite strongly, just in the sense of a little bit of stigma around that. Is that something that you see as well?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the stigma is huge. And one of the reasons why Loneliness Awareness Week has grown so much in traction and it is so needed is because people do feel ashamed and embarrassed. And we do a lot of stuff around education for language use, but, particularly people say tackling loneliness and I'm suffering from loneliness. And even in the media, these negative connotations, and it has this real Billy No Mates vibe about it, I guess. People just they feel really ashamed and embarrassed. But actually, what we do know about loneliness is that when it persists, chronic loneliness, I'm not a fan of that term because I think it's quite medicalizing. But actually, when it does persist, it is bad for your health. So actually, we do need to make sure that we empower people to understand that it's really important to know what you need. And interestingly, we do a lot of stuff with kids in schools. And we went into primary school years ago for the first time and spoke to some 6-7-year-olds and asked them, like 30 of them, have you ever been lonely? And every single kid put their hand up. The adults in the room looked absolutely horrified. And when we said, it's okay, like, when did you feel lonely? And they said, when I couldn't play football, when I couldn't go to a birthday party because we were going on holiday. That in its essence is transient loneliness. It's that feeling of not having what you want to have. And yet as adults, we continually have a narrative that it's bad to be on your own.
A few things struck me about that. And just about going back to the stigma, I remember thinking how I have never been brave enough to tell people when I'm feeling lonely. And I remember thinking in COVID times how I started playing like online poker tournaments with my friends, and we'd have this kind of, do you remember something called House Party? It was like a kind of budget Zoom. I remember playing that. We'd just arranged to meet weekly, and it was people that I'd otherwise would never really kind of make contact with. The COVID lockdown gave us an excuse to be brave enough to kind of arrange that and be like, oh yeah, cool, yeah, we're just gonna sit on our laptops and pay half attention to this game that we're playing. But ultimately, it was just a way of catching up. And I've never actually been as connected with a lot of those people as in that lockdown time, because we're probably too ashamed to be like, Tuesday night, do you fancy playing poker online? It's just not a done thing with your time now. You've got to be out and enjoying things and being active and being worldly.
No, do podcasts instead.
Yeah, now we do podcasts instead. Goodness me. But yeah, it just struck me when you said about the stigma and how, God, that really kind of resonated with me. Another thing that resonated with me, and you talked about being a therapist, is I work as a GP, and I did a home visit, and I went to visit this patient who was just sat watching television, and it was midday. It was some kind of game show, and she was just so delighted that I'd come to see her. It didn't matter what I said about her osteoarthritis, whatever it was I was seeing her about. It was just the fact that she had a visitor, and I just felt this really nagging stomach-like depression of how sad this all was. And I thought, how many people in this neighbourhood are currently just sat watching the same meaningless nonsense on the TV who don't want to be? And what can we do about that? This patient probably wouldn't really be suffering with her osteoarthritis so much, or that might be lessened if she was socially engaged. And how do we go about that? And it made me think, gosh, is this our culture? Are we doing something wrong on a societal level? Or what do you think are the cultural trends that are driving the loneliness in our society?
There's been a lot of change, hasn't there? And I guess thinking particularly of the older generations, I remember my grandmother, who amazingly lived till 103. But she used to live in the same place, and she had the cousins and neighbours and uncles, and no one left. Everybody was there, and the door was open, and there wasn't a TV for a large proportion of her life, and they all sat down and had dinner together, and everyone stopped working, and there was no internet. And so you just take a snapshot of what's changed culturally. Technology transient lifestyles have all had a massive shift in where we are kind of culturally, demographically, where we've shifted a lot. And actually, a lot of people say to me, oh, that's a really bad thing. It's not a bad thing. It's what's happened, and it's the point that we're at. And there's some very good things about technology. You can have house party. Imagine if we'd had a pandemic back in, the 20s, how much more challenging that would have been. So there are changes around that. But what we need to do as a society is we need to recognise that things are different and actually really actively make sure that we're looking into those things. How can we be more connected as a community? I guess the other point around that sort of demographic side as well is we know that there are more people living alone than there ever have been. We know people are having less children. The divorce rate's higher. Relationship status changes. We know that some marginalised groups adversely experience loneliness because of some challenges as well. So, I think there's lots of different factors, and a lot have culminated into us being at this point. And interestingly, we haven't gone back to pre-pandemic levels of connected and loneliness. And actually, my hope was really that while we were going through it and you saw this level of connecting and people doing all of this, is that we could really try and maximise on that and get people to understand that this is really important and really valuable. Make sure that you recognise that within yourself and others.
Amy, you alluded to this already, but I just wanted to talk about the actual health impact of loneliness. I know on the Marmalade Trust website, there's some pretty shocking stats, which I've seen elsewhere as well, just in terms of the effect of loneliness upon your health. So this is not just something that is unpleasant for people. This is something that can really have long-lasting and devastating health effects. That's right, isn't it?
It is, yeah. And research has shown that it increases your levels of cortisol, increases your levels of inflammation. Some research indicated that means that you're more prone to some physical health conditions. I guess on the earlier spectrum of that, what we see is people starting to experience higher levels of anxiety, of depression, socially withdrawing from people, kind of, keeping safe, if you like, kind of going back to that biological sort of wiring of what this is. We used to form part of tribes and need to be connected for our survival. So when you start to get in that level of high alert, the body goes into high alert and you start to sort of feel disconnected. It can mean that people start questioning their own relationships that they do have, start to overthink, and we've potentially all seen that if you've been on your own for a bit of a time. It does have an impact, and the World Health Organization recently launched its commission on social connection, and interestingly sort of talks there about the mental well-being, physical well-being and social well-being, and how you need to have all of those components to be well. And I think increasingly we're starting to realize that this term social health, social well-being, is a really key factor. Those patients that are at home on their own, who are delighted to have a visitor from a GP when they're not feeling very well, there's a mismatch there. There's a mismatch between what connection that person's got, but also what we need to be able to offer, sort of as a society, how we talk about it, all of those things.
Have you seen, just to elaborate on some of the physical health consequences of loneliness, do you have more examples of how it's detrimental in that way?
I am not a physician, but the evidence is emerging, and there is evidence about it being as bad for you as 15 cigarettes a day. That's it's a broad stat, and you need to really look into the detail. The WHO stated from some research that there were 750,000 deaths globally related purely to loneliness. So we do know that it does have a substantial issue, and certainly what we see is they coexist quite often. People that we support will have multiple health issues as well. And I guess just on terms of a practical point of view, if you're dealing with multiple pathologies or a long-term condition, life and the environment is likely to be not as accessible. You may need to have longer periods at home, and you may not be able to access the environment in the same way. We know that it's likely to increase the chances in you not being able to connect in the same way as other people.
Yeah.
Yeah, I certainly had a look at those physical health consequences as well. And there are quite a lot of shocking headlines that come with it. That loneliness increases your overall mortality risk. It's comparable to established health risks like obesity, smoking. It can weaken your immune system. It can put strain on your cardiovascular system, increased risk of infections and illness. So all of it is quite shocking. I saw that stat about the 15 cigarettes a day as well. I don't love that in terms of, I don't know, your thoughts on this. It felt to me like quite a sensationalist, or it felt like a good headline. And whilst I appreciate it's important to know just how dangerous this can be, it feels like I don't know how they would know that. There are so many other factors at play there. And it just struck me as something that if you are someone who is feeling lonely because of the loss of a partner or something which is out of your control, that's quite a difficult thing to hear. But I get the sentiment behind it.
I totally agree. And I was kind of hesitant to mention it because it is a very big stat. And you're absolutely right. There's lots of different factors. How do you totally exclude, other than doing some very immoral scientific experiments of putting someone away from people for long lengths of time? How do you really measure that? And I guess that's why I'm sort of being slightly hesitant about really labouring the point there about the physical health. We do know that it does have some effect on your physical health. There is an increase in mortality. The World Health Organization recognises that there are deaths related to loneliness, and we can see that does have an impact, and it certainly has an impact on well-being as well. And there's interesting studies as well. There's a study that shows that you perceive temperature differently when you're lonely, that actually you perceive yourself to be colder. And the fact that people who are poorer experience higher levels of loneliness, even that in itself, the cost of living crisis, not being able to put heating on, the fact that you might even feel colder. There's lots of interesting studies around that.
I think we've studied exercise and its impact in cancer rates, which was really eye-opening to me because it's something that didn't seem obviously linked to someone's cancer coming back, i.e. the link or the benefit is not easily explained, but the statistics are really striking. The evidence is really powerful. And similarly with something like loneliness, it's difficult to be tangible and, really say what the impacts are. But I know that when I socialise, it does make you feel great. And those kind of hormone responses and the cascade effect from that, the consequences could be hugely beneficial in ways that we don't really understand yet. But
there is even research to show that oxytocin is released when we give eye contact. When we hug people, actually being in contact with people, and certainly through that pandemic and coming out of the pandemic, that transition that we all felt. What did that mean for people? People living on their own, and there's some interesting work going on in the background.
I mean, that's quite a depressing summary in some ways of how damaging loneliness can be. What can we do then? So what can we do individually and collectively, I guess, to help reverse loneliness, to address this issue? I know it's interesting you mentioned the WHO. I was reading also that they declared this a global health crisis a couple of years ago, just to really signify the severity of this. So what's the answer here?
They did, yeah. And just to clarify around that, I think it is important to say the persistent loneliness, known as chronic loneliness, that is in the UK, that's 7% of the population. That's 7% too many, but that is just 7%. We need to focus our intervention in society through the things that we do, like social prescribing and other connected networks, need to make sure that we're supporting those people who are experiencing persistent loneliness. I guess it comes back to what I sort of said at the beginning. Loneliness is a natural human emotion. It's something we're all likely to experience. We have key life points or key life indicators as they're known. So times when we're more likely to experience loneliness, and it's through a life course. So that might be when you're a child and changing school, when you've fallen out with your friends, if you're being bullied, if you go off to university, whether you become a new parent, whether you get divorced, when you retire is a really big one as well, losing the occupation of work, and obviously bereavement as well. So there are lots of times when we know that we're more at risk of that, and that question of what is your social connection is really important. Just to kind of break that down into the two things that we can kind of do, I think collectively that multi-systemic approach is really important. Like we've said, talking about loneliness is really important at whatever level you're talking about it. Maybe you've had a recently split up in a relationship and you're feeling a bit lonely, but you don't want to say that to someone, but you find another way to say, actually, oh, I haven't got any plans this weekend. Oh, it's going to be a tricky one. Oh dear, just find other ways to have the conversation. Ask people about where they are in their own situation in your neighborhood. Or is there someone who's a new parent who maybe is home on their own all day? Maybe just pop up a note in, here's my number if you need anything. But actually that here's my number if you need anything doesn't actually mean practically, do you want me to bring round something for you? That actually means, well, I'm here if you want to chat as well, or a walk around the park. Like, think about what is in your community. What we do know, and this is really emerging as well, is that cohesive, connected communities, ones that are safer, more welcoming. I mean, it's logical, isn't it? We know that they're nicer places to live. I was talking to someone the other day, he was saying the house prices in their area are slightly higher because everybody wants to live in this street, because every month they shut the street for play out dates, and they just they have their whole network of childcare and looking after the older people, and it's almost a little bit how it used to be a long time ago. So I think collective responsibility is really important in your community. What can you do to support that, to build that? You might say, oh, I don't live in a particularly safe or good area, but what can you do to help make that a better area? Can you put your bins out at the same time as someone else, your neighbour? If you hear them, dash to go and put your own recycling out, just so you can stop and have a chat. Can you go to shop local, go to your local greengrocers, and rather than going to the self-service checkout in Tesco's, I make a bit of a point that if there's one there, because I don't want them to ever go, because they're so vitally important to people around in our society that are connecting with people all day. Often the people we support who say, I haven't had a conversation with anyone for a long time apart from the person in the bank or something. So know that those conversations are really hugely valuable for people when you're standing waiting at the bus stop. Or I always talk about, like, when you go out in the countryside and you go, I've got a dog, you go and walk the dog. Dogs are great socialisers anyway, but when you go and walk out in the countryside, isn't it nice? People say hello. It's lovely. And then you go to sort of anonymous cities sometimes and, everyone's head down, screen down, look up, talk to people, connect with people, support and engage in your community. So I think collectively community is a really important factor.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. In the, I'm very lucky in the sense that where we live, a lot of other people have young children, and it's just so nice being able to walk out of the house and within 5 minutes you've seen 3 or 4 people everyone's in a similar boat. You've got that sense of community, and it makes such a difference from from previous places that I lived and where you've never even said a word to your neighbours.
Yeah, there's a thing called weak ties, which is again about being connected into your area. I'm quite interested in this. Those little kind of micro connections. And I think just a thing to be telling people to do is, even if there's someone in your street who's become a new parent, actually don't go to Tesco's and go to the self-service checkout. Go down your high street, walk down your high street, go to the greengrocers, go and sit in the coffee shop and have that chat with people. Really build up your those micro bits of connection, because they are hugely valuable at making you feel good. And we know that, really. Like, it's obvious when you say it. Isn't it nice when you go somewhere and somebody says, how are you? Or are you having a good day? Like, it's a lovely feeling. And I'm quite an introvert, actually, and sometimes I have to really force myself to not be, because we can be kind of invisible in society. We can book restaurants on tech. We don't even need to ring. We can do everything without speaking to someone. So actually, how can we kind of embed some of these things back into our life to make sure that we are communicating regularly with people, building that sense of connection?
That last point you made was what got me and Mike initially talking about this, was the development of tech and how, like you said, you can just be invisible and you can just put too much emphasis on social media or the stuff that doesn't make you feel good, and how that seems to be the trend. And our podcast's about health and wellness trends, and this is a slightly unwelcome trend, isn't it? This progression into digital isolation. But it's really, I just feel kind of very positive just hearing you talk about maybe some of those anecdotes or just visiting the greengrocer, because yes, when I've had those interactions, I have felt very positive. But you're right, it's an active process. It's making me realise, yes, you have to be more active. I have to put more effort into it. And I'm also wondering if there's something we've talked about on the previous episode, something about vulnerability and almost acknowledging it, being active in it, and then being comfortable talking about it and saying, oh, actually, yeah, I'm going to commit to this, and how powerful that can be.
Yeah, it's interesting as well, because I think it's almost has a stigma in doing that sometimes. I mean, I know my 16-year-old nephew came down to London. He lives up in Yorkshire, and he came down to London the other day. And I said, oh, how was the tube journey down? He was like, yeah, great. I chatted to 4 or 5 people, find out about where some guy had been on holiday. And I kind of judged him for it. I even said, I was like, look, why you don't talk to people on the tube? You look at your feet and you ignore it, or you look at your phone. You don't interact with strangers. And actually, thinking about it, it was a really nice touch that obviously it'd be lovely if everybody did. That's not the reality, is it? But it's it feels like I found myself being a little bit judgmental that someone actually engaged in that kind of day-to-day interactions.
Yeah, and it's a cultural thing, I think, isn't it? We've kind of almost like, oh, that person's talking to us, are they a bit strange? Like, actually, you go certain places and you experience more of that. And isn't it nice when somebody does, as we've said, has those random connection moments with you that really can make your day. I make a bit of a point of kind of giving myself certain amount of things that I do for my own kind of social health. I do sort of various, well, I'll say to someone, oh, your outfit looks nice, a random stranger, or go and help someone with something, or just having those conversations, because you don't know when that's the only conversation that person's going to have that day. And that's not necessarily the older person. It can also be the younger person as well. The highest age group of people experiencing loneliness is 13 to 29. So younger people are saying that they are feeling it more. And if they're in their screens, on their phones all the time, then actually looking up from that, having those levels of connection. This is something that you need to identify within yourself. Actually, the solution is not going to see your GP. Obviously, if you are feeling persistently lonely and it's starting to have an impact on your health or your well-being, going to see your GP is a great first step. But actually, it's about thinking about what you need. So we've developed this kind of 3-step approach, and it's something that I put together a few years ago, which is basically around knowing and acknowledging that feeling. So thinking is this, a depression, anxiety, or an ill health, or is this loneliness? So understanding it just generally, and then acknowledging it. Doesn't have to be with other people, but acknowledging it with yourself. Okay, I am feeling lonely. Great if you can then talk to other people. Then I think it's about identifying what you need. And we've touched on this, because of, people being introverts, extroverts, having different levels of needs and different desires of their types of connections. Some people find that their gaming is a great social connection. Other people like to be in big groups of people. Some people hate being in big groups of people. Other people like to feel like they're part of a tribe. The football club, the hockey team is the sort of that sense of being part of belonging. Other people like one-to-one relationships, or some people like talking on the phone, other people don't. So what is it that you need? And breaking down and understanding more about loneliness. We got loads of information on our website, but understanding a bit more about what it is for you, and really that breaking that down is just really important. And then it's about taking some action. And if you do feel like it's having an impact on your well-being, on your health, then a healthcare professional is a great first step. But actually, if you are somebody who is digitally active, you can see things that are going on, you understand that this is what's happening, maybe you're not in a relationship and therefore you want to be, so you need to direct your time into that. Or maybe you miss that your group of people that you're not a part of and you want to be feeling engaged in that. Or maybe your community, maybe it's maybe you've got a new job, you're remote working all the time, you need to have a chat with your boss and say, actually, I used to go in the office all the time and I really miss it. So whether there are components around your life that you can then take some direct action on is really important.
Yeah, it's got my cogs turning. Just kind of thinking about, I guess I'm a new parent and I moved to a new city, and then definitely felt lonely at times. And, you feel isolated when you're not really getting much sleep and you've just got a baby who doesn't really talk to you. But I've certainly made a few steps personally where I'm like, okay, no, I'm gonna try and arrange a paddle club, like for us who used to play tennis, who are no longer kind of competent at playing tennis. Let's get together and try and meet and play paddle. So I started doing that, and it's been hugely beneficial. I really enjoy it, but it's made me think about how my life might pan out, and in terms of retirement and what I need kind of going forward. And I've had some really interesting thoughts. So thank you for this conversation. I'm certainly going to look into this more. And then it made me realise, how do people look into this more? If they are, I guess, experiencing feelings like this, is this something that they can approach the Marmalade Trust for? And what about for those who are caring for people who may have recognised symptoms or signs of this in those who aren't, say, digitally active themselves? Can they reach out as well?
Yes, so we run a connection service which is all across the UK, and that's run by volunteers. So we train up volunteers. We're looking for volunteers if anyone would like to reach out to us. And that's where we call and contact, and we work through a kind of 3-stage approach of getting to know the person, getting to find out exactly what they can do, what they want to do. Sometimes we've had people referred to that who don't go out of the house. So, but they don't use the internet, and we've referred them on to book clubs over the phone and all kinds of interesting things. So we run that service, and we've got spaces for volunteers and anyone that is feeling lonely. If you are digitally active, we've got lots of stuff on our website as well, which is www.marmaladetrust.org.
Amy, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a real pleasure, and best of luck with everything in the future.
Thank you so much for having me. It's really been a really good chat.
Thanks, Amy.